So Steph is asking, what was the law of God before he gave Moses the 10 commandments to give to the Israelites?
Excellent question. And I mean, at a high level, God's law always is and always will be his law of love. Like that's the everlasting law. Love God, love others. That will always be the law. It always was, always is, or is now, and will be the law. And what happens is, historically, when God would create animals humans, angels, sentient beings, uh, they will naturally have good inclinations and will have the law written on their heart in a sense. So it's going to be very natural to them. And then what happens though is if we fall and over time get more and more corrupted, the tendency shifts to then more indulge lust, indulge hate, indulge these things that lead more towards sin. And that's kind of the main story that we see going on in Genesis. Genesis is showing that very steep decline in humanity. Doesn't take very long to just reach the rock bottom depths of hellish behavior. So God's law holds people and society happily and safely together. I mean, it's like a fundamental, essential law. God's moral law is to humans like what gravity is to the universe, holding the planets and galaxies and stars and everything in order. If there wasn't that gravity, everything would just be flying apart. Everything would just be chaos. Things would be crashing and smashing. And we have the nice uh, relationship with the sun and the moon and the other planets that we do because of the law of gravity. And God's law works the same way. How can you have all these independent humans interacting with each other, living together in a way where they're not killing, stealing, and driving each other crazy and hurting each other and all that? God's law is protective and by it's protecting us from others, and it's giving us this. When everybody is following it, everybody is loving, we are in a state of peace and happiness and joy. That's the state in which we're supposed to be in. So Genesis shows us how God created perfect order in the beginning. God said everything was very good. And then Genesis also shows us how after Adam and Eve sinned by disobeying the word of God, and you could say, well, yeah, there wasn't, anything on 10 commandments about eating the forbidden fruit. No, but did they love God? Did they honor God? Did they put God first? Or did they do something very selfish? They did something very selfish, counter to God, doubted God, disbelieved God, thought God was holding back, and then took an action to benefit themselves. It was, it's the essence of sin when you understand sin is selfishness. So man departed, or at least taking actions in the pursuit of selfishness. So man has continued to depart further and further and further in from this natural order of love that God created. And Genesis is trying to show us the consequences of man's wickedness and how God just keeps intervening at times to keep humanity from totally plunging into utter and total depravity. That's what Genesis is telling us in a nutshell. And there's this insightful verse from Romans 7, starting at verse 7. It says, Paul writing, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the law. For I would not have known covetousness unless the law said, 'You shall not covet.' But sin, taking the opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire. For apart from the law was dead, I was alive." What was it?
Apart from the law, sin.
Sin was dead. That's right. So apart from the law, sin was dead. And that's critical here. Keep that note. Keep that in mind. And then he goes on to say, "I was alive once without the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died." So sin, almost to be sin and to exist, has to have that counterpoint of the law. Like sin wouldn't exist if there wasn't the law. It's just like a shadow. Can you have shadow without a light? It's only by shining a light that then we have the thing that then becomes a shadow. Or a wave can have a ocean wave without the water. That's kind of what sin is. Without the law, if sin is transgression of the law, then you're not going to have any sin without first having the law. And we kind of see this hinted at and demonstrated when we look at Cain and Abel, that story. If we go to Genesis 4:7, God has just rejected Cain's offering because Cain didn't obey God. And he's upset. He's so mad. He's hating his brother. And God shows up and says, Cain, look, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So here, this is like the first reference to sin, sin as sin, I believe. And it's also figurative. I think it's also figuratively talking about Satan. Satan is crouching at the doors. Satan is seeking to rule and master over him. But it's also talking about just sin. He's about to let sin just control him. He's about to go into utter selfish mode. And God's saying, like, you either control it or it will control you. How could there be sin if there wasn't a law? Did Cain totally not know that murder was wrong? I would contend that he knew that taking life was a big deal, and they had seen it done because, in fact, the sacrifice that was supposed to be made was the sacrifice of a lamb. Abel brought the lambs. Cain's supposed to slaughter one of them for himself. He doesn't want Abel's lambs. He's like, no, I want to offer my fruit. I want to offer what I grew. I want to do it my way. And so, ironically, he wouldn't kill the lamb, but he totally then went and killed his brother. And so he knew murder was bad. He knew murder was wrong. We don't need the 10 Commandments to create the existence of murder. It's about the most anti-loving thing a person can do. It was outright transgression of God's eternal law. Then let's flash forward to Genesis 6, and there we see the story of the flood, or the time just before it. It says, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, how can you have evil and wickedness and these sort of moral judgments being stated if there was no law? What are these people being judged against? Did God just randomly say, I feel like calling these people evil because I disagree with them? Or is it because they actually are transgressing a law of God that was in existence at that time? And we get even more color. I mean, well, in contrast to them, in Genesis 6:9, we have Noah, and it says, this is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Now, just in this statement, we get these vibes here going, right, that Noah is keeping God's law. I mean, he might not be perfect. Maybe he's sinning and God's forgiving him. But there's this level of Noah's trying to get with God's program, whereas the rest of the world is just going into utter selfish sinning mode. And a lot of the sin is actually, it looks like, I would say, it's probably murder and along those lines. And even though the 10 Commandments, the one against murder only says thou shalt not murder, things that even tend towards hurting someone or, shortening their life, things like that really can fall under that commandment. So here with this is saying that the pre-flood people were filled, they had caused the earth to be filled with violence. And God said, because of that, I want to destroy them with the earth. So they're very violent. Are we supposed to think that there was no law against murder again? Like, again, Cain didn't murder because there was no law against murder, and these people are totally fine in what they did because God hadn't yet written the 10 Commandments. That's just ludicrous. Again, we see there's clear evil that can exist even before the 10 Commandments were set in stone and given to Moses. Uh, and even right after the flood, God talks about the shedding of blood. Genesis 9 says, "Whoever sheds human blood, by human shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made mankind." So murder's bad. He's emphasizing that again. Uh, Interestingly, Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 18 says, "Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" So think about that. If we again say that there was no Ten Commandments, there was no law before that, then why did God destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Wouldn't they then therefore not be sinful because there was no law to tell them what was sinful? And and they will be totally off the hook. Answer is, like, we know these people were wicked, and God destroyed them for a very important reason, and it's to be a demonstration of what's even going to be done to the wicked at the end of time. So God's law has always been, will always be, this law of love. And so these are just a handful of probably very drastic situations in the Bible highlighting this wickedness and evil. But you could pick just almost every single commandment. You can find a story to illustrate how violation of it was wrong earlier on in the Bible. Take like honoring your father and your mother. Well, Noah's sons, most of them were horrified when they saw that his dad was doing some lewd things, but Ham saw his father and left, and was very bad. And it says when Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his younger son had done to him, right? He realized he had been wronged. He cursed Ham's son. Uh, you have the Tower of Babel, and they're like trying to build up their name and make a name for themselves and go against God, and it's almost taking on the name of God, right? Almost against the second commandment. And then you have all these stories of Abraham twice and his son Ishmael, oh, not Ishmael, Isaac once, lying, where they go to a place like Egypt or to Amalekites, and then they're like, "Oh no, my wife is really pretty." They get worried. They're worried that people will covet the wife and then will kill them. So then they lie and try to also avoid. But then God intervenes because He doesn't want to see an act of adultery being committed. He doesn't want to see the wife of Abraham or the wife of Isaac sleeping with another man. So he intervenes. So we see God affirming this concept of marital faithfulness and showing adultery is a bad thing. And last but not least, usually when people want to say there's no law that existed before the Ten Commandments, is part of this argument that is really getting to the Sabbath. They want to say the Sabbath was only for the Jews, only given to them at the time of the Ten Commandments. But we see in Genesis chapter 2 that actually is not the case. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 says, "And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from his work and his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made." So God sanctified it. He made it holy. He set that day apart. It is now holy because God made it holy. It's always going to be holy because God made it holy. And it's holy whether we recognize it is holy or not. And God wants us to keep it holy. So it's interesting then when the Ten Commandments are given to Moses, it reads, the fourth commandment reads, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." He's not saying make it holy. He's saying keep it holy and remember that it's the Sabbath. It was the Sabbath. It always was since the beginning, the Sabbath, and it then was always a holy day since God made it a holy day. And then our job is now to continue to keep it holy, to remember that day. And so this wasn't just for the Jews. This was something that then Adam kept the Sabbath. Probably we can be very confident that Abraham would have kept the Sabbath. And the Jews, the Hebrews may have lost it when they went down to Israel, but now God reminds them of it with the fourth commandment. So, Tina, anything else you'd like to add to the law before the Ten Commandments?
No, I think you covered it pretty thoroughly, but just just really quick that it was before when they went to Egypt. Yeah, sorry, I know you meant Egypt, but
what did I say?
You said Israel.
Oh, they went down to Israel. Yeah, good catch. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm a grammar police or whatever. Can't help it. I'm sorry, but yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and you're right. I mean, basically, sin is the transgression of the law. And, God's law is a law of love. And it's so anything that goes against, love for God or love for other people, it's still sin. And, it's still God's law was definitely in place. And it might not have been, in the same, taught the same way because, before, when God made Adam and Eve, I mean, they had, perfect minds and perfect bodies. They didn't have to have things written down because if you told them once, they would remember forever. But, after time and sin, we need things written down. We don't have that perfect memory, that total recall. So, God said, in the most clear manner, I'm going to write with my own finger in the first person, this 10 Commandments law on tables of stone, the most permanent thing he could, put in nature. And so, and that's just something I think is just so remarkable. And, the thing too that I can't help but notice about the 10 Commandments, because last week we had a question about somebody saying, well, wasn't, the 10 Commandments, basically written in the book of Deuteronomy, and that was handwritten by Moses, and that was placed on the side of the Ark of the Covenant, not the 10 Commandments on the inside. So couldn't that still be done away with? And I was like, no. And the thing is, what I didn't bring up then, and I'll bring up now, is when you read the 10 Commandments, they're written in the first person. And when you look at Exodus chapter 20, it says, the first commandment says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Who is me that is speaking? That is God himself. And so, I mean, really and truly, you can't, get away from the fact that God is, communicating who he is through these 10 commandments. These are a transcript of who he is, a character of love. And so, when we try to do away with his commandments, you're basically saying we don't really want God, who God is. We just want what we want to make him to be. And it's basically an idol. And it's idolatry when we do away with something that God has put in place as permanent and as important as his law and his 10 commandments. So anyways, just to reinforce, what you're sharing, because it's super important.
Mm-hmm.